Hello and welcome to OPA GCSE Sociology, and today we're going to finish up with what is the link between social class and educational success. So this is the second part in this is the second part in looking at social class and educational success. So just for the do now, if you could get on with those 5 questions. So what is the correspondence principle? Outline 2 strengths of qualitative approach to research. Outline 2 strengths of a quantitative approach to research. What are the 9 different types of schools? And then finally, how do you measure class in educational research? Okay, so I'm just going to mute the video. If you pause it and then you just write down your answers, and we'll go over it momentarily. Right, so let's go through the answers for that. So the correspondence principle is a Marxist concept. So it's the ways the hidden curriculum benefit capitalism and reinforce class inequality in education. So remember, it's stuff that schools teach you that is not on the curriculum, that is not technically part of the courses. So an example of that might be the fact that it encourages you to be obedient to authority figures, just like it will later on in the workplace, and make you not question necessarily some of the unethical parts of capitalism. So for number 2, outline 2 strengths of qualitative research. So it has rapport. So the fact that there's a good relationship generally, because there's this flexibility in qualitative research. It means the researcher and the participant can build a relationship and then hopefully get really good validity and depth in their outcomes and the data collection. Validity, so validity just refers to data or information that has a lot of detail. So instead of just finding out have you committed a crime as a closed question, you might ask open questions like have you committed a crime? Why was it that you caused that crime? So it's open questions. Okay, number 3, outline 2 strengths of quantitative research. So reliability. So it's because it's often in a structured way with a standardized approach to asking the questions and a sort of standardized way to conceptualize certain terms. It means it's easy to repeat, and it also means it's hard to manipulate in many ways. So say, for example, I had 20 questions that were multiple choice in exactly the same order, worded in exactly the same way. It'd be really easy for me to then compare the results, say in what it's like in Thurrock compared to Newcastle. Okay, it's representative because it's quantitative, it's generally closed question. It's usually very easy to collect the data and get big samples. And big samples mean it's representative. In other words, it's generalizable to the wider population. It's an actual reflection of the population you're studying. It's not just 5 people. You're studying hundreds, if not thousands, and you're considering who you're studying to be almost a portrait or reflection of what group in society you're trying to study. And they're convenient, they're cost effective and time effective. Okay, the 8 different types of schools. So we've got state comprehensives, academy schools, faith schools, private schools, special schools, specialist schools, free schools, and grammar schools. And then the ways in which we measure class and educational research, if you remember that, it's free school meals and pupil premium students. So these are both sort of indicators of whether perhaps people are in low incomes, maybe gaining additional support. Right, so for our first task, what I would like you to do, I want you to match the keywords to the correct definition. We went over this briefly. We didn't go through all of them though. And just give it a go though. So I've broken it up into internal factors, so those factors that are inside the school, and external ones, so outside of the school. And all of these are ways in which class affects educational success. So pause the video, give it a go, try to match them up, and then we'll go through the actual answers. Right, so the first one, so material deprivation, so that's the inability of households or individuals to afford goods and activities that are typical in a society at a given point in time. Cultural deprivation, the view that working class children lack the cultural capital that helps achieve educational success. Remember that cultural capital is the skills that the middle class pick up that give them an advantage. So for parents' attitudes, it's whether parents have a belief in the education system. This impacts whether parents take an interest in their children's education through means like revision or having academic aspirations for them. Okay, so for speech patterns, many middle class children have better linguistic skills compared to the working class children. These skills and language correspond closely to that in textbooks or spoken by teachers, giving middle class children an advantage. So the next one now, so we're moving on. We're moving on to those factors inside the school. So teachers and pupil interaction. So teachers can often make judgments and classify certain students based on their class. This gives working class students a disadvantage as teachers may conduct themselves differently in social interaction at the expense of their education. So they might actually sort of label working class kids as not being good students. Okay, assessing and streaming, working class students who may already be at an educational disadvantage may be put in lower ability classes, making academic progress harder to obtain. And then finally, that means subcultures. So many middle class children have better certain working class subcultures may encourage norms, values, and roles that are anti-school in their nature. Okay. So I'll go through that very slowly just once more. Right, so now that we know what those factors are, what I've done is just for task 2, yeah, obviously I haven't got this sheet, so we're just going to read through it, and I'm going to explain in a bit more detail as we go along. It's just give you one study you can refer to in these internal and external factors. Okay, so it's literally just talking through them. You might want to pause it at this point if you don't want to hear me talk through it, but it's just giving you an example for each one. So material deprivation, so Cooper and Stewart found money makes a difference to educational achievement. So things like cold and overcrowded rooms, inadequate or poor food nutrition, a lack of books and computers. These are things associated with maybe working class children that lead to them struggling and having barriers in their learning. Okay, and then cultural deprivation. So Ball found many medical school students, medical school networking meetings were dominated by middle class parents and students, as they were more likely to be aware of the events and make connections that would benefit later in their education for work experience / graduate schemes. And that's so true in terms of, say, for example, even if you're thinking of going to university, many people already know years in advance because their parents have taught them through it and have done loads of research or network. They know what university they're going to, they know the reasons why, and things like that. Okay, parental attitude. So Bull et al. Whenever you see a tau, by the way, it just means and other. So rather than a long list of surnames. So Bull et al. Middle class students. So this is with parents' attitudes now, similar to what we talked about before, actually. Middle class students had or have an advantage with parents selecting better schools. So this is because they have better knowledge and context of what those better schools are. They have the money to send their children to schools that maybe are at a distance. So that's true. They might have access to a car or money for the bus or trains or whatever. Cultural material capital to ensure children's success. Okay, so their children perhaps will sort of blend in a bit more. Okay, now we move on to speech patterns. So Bernstein found that middle class students had better speech code that gave them an educational advantage. So they had greater vocabulary, they had greater complex sentences, and that meant that they could concentrate on the skills and absorbing the knowledge on their courses. Okay, Becker found for teacher interaction. A study of 60 Chicago students found that they were more likely to see middle-class students as the ideal type based on interaction. So there might be here a labeling going on for working class kids. So for assessing and streaming, Gilborn and Udall found working class students were more likely to be placed in lower ability classes that achieve less. And that links into this idea they're more likely to, let's say you've got a middle class kid who's not doing as well or is not as well behaved. Teachers are more likely to take a punt on that kid doing better in a higher group as opposed to a working class kid. And then finally, subcultures. So Paul Willis, Learning to Labour, found working class kids developed lad cultures that were largely anti-school. We've talked about that to death. So I'm just going to mute myself. Feel free to pause the video if you need to, just to get these down. Right, so for task 3, we're just going to go over and look at those key theories and what they say about class and educational success, just like a brief overview as we have been. So the functionalists strongly believe in the idea of meritocracy. They remember that idea that if you work hard and you're talented, you'll achieve educational success. So they don't necessarily believe in this idea of class having influence. They don't consider people's economic resources and background. So they don't see that maybe working class kids may be talented and hardworking, but don't achieve because of their resources. They might be lacking. And they also believe that this educational success helps in the process of role allocation. So they're actually saying that, you know, kids deserve to be in the position they are in. So they're quite brutal and assume that, say, if you've got a wealthy kid who's lazy but has loads of resources and has been successful, they say they deserve that success, compared to, say, a working class kid who's not succeeded, because not because of lack of talent or hard work, but because of their lack of resources. They say they deserve their poor position in society. So it's quite cruel. And then a critique of this, functionalists fail to consider that the top jobs in society are dominated by the higher classes. Okay, so they don't understand that pattern. Okay, the Marxists, obviously, they're going to really agree with everything we've just gone over. So they think meritocracy is unfair. They think, just as I've talked about, it's not as clear cut as that. It's a rigged system. And they think that this rigged system, where rich kids go to better schools, get better jobs afterwards, that's a reflection of reproducing class inequality. So it's just making things, reinforcing your position. So they highlight the advantages enjoyed by private school and middle-class children in mainstream schools. Marxists fail to appreciate, however, the opportunities that education can provide for people to get out of lower classes. So somewhere in the middle between the functionalists here of the meritocracy and the Marxists who are kind of anti-meritocracy, who think it's a falsehood. There's a middle ground to be had. And then the feminists, just to sort of finish up on going over the theories, feminists believe that educational system is a tool for secondary socialization to reinforce patriarchy. So they're talking about, they don't really talk about class. Only really the Marxist feminists talk a little bit about class. So they mainly see the education system in terms of gender, which we'll go on to in the next lesson. So they fail to also consider that boys are now achieving less than girls at school. That can be used as a critique, or some of the feminists anyway. Right, for the final task, I just want you to answer this question. So discuss how far sociologists agree that social class difference in educational achievement results primarily from in-school factors. So you'll have one paragraph that is looking at in-school factors. Okay, and then so you might choose, let's go to that list again. So you might talk about, for your first paragraph, the teacher-pupil interaction or setting/streaming or subcultures. And then you're saying, well, actually, no, it's not just internal factors, it's educational, external factors, sorry, in your second part. So you might talk about material deprivation. You might talk about cultural deprivation or parents' attitudes or speech patterns. So you've got paragraph 1, which is agreeing with the statement, internal factors. Then you've got paragraph 2, which is disagreeing, saying no external factors. And then you've got in your conclusion, okay, you're just outlining what the debate is that's just been had. And you're just saying where your point of view is with that. Okay, feel free to do that. It's in time conditions, 15 minutes preferably. Bring it in and I'll mark it. And that concludes the recording.